Hello everyone. In this lesson, we are going to learn how to interact with users and display messages using some of R's useful functions. So let us go ahead and begin with the readline function. Now this function takes user input from the console and then simply returns a character string. But first things first, we need to check the documentation on this particular function. So we type the question mark followed by the name of the function. And if we should execute, we then get to the documentation and we read about it. So the subject is to read a line from the terminal, especially in interactive use. When we go to the usage section, we see that the very argument we can pass into the readline function is just simply prompt. And the prompt argument is a string which is printed when you prompt the user for input. Should usually end with a space, and I'm going to demonstrate that very soon. So basically, what we are doing is we are just simply going to ask a user for an input. So I will just now write the readline function, and within it specify my argument, which is going to be the prompt, and I supply a string or character or text to this particular argument. So I am just simply going to say, what is your name? Now, if I should go ahead and execute this line of code, now you do realize that in the console, we have what is your name, which is the prompt that you gave to the argument, now displayed in the console asking you for your name. Now you realize that because I did not add any space after, for example, the question mark, the cursor is blinking right immediately after the question mark. Anyways, that is not a problem. If you just go ahead and type what you need to give it, like my name, Elijah, and execute, you end up getting the Elijah retained in the console. So it is normally usual practice to just simply have a space after your prompt. So for example, I would just put a space after the question mark, execute again, and then you would see that there is a space after your message, and then it can isolate between the prompt which you're asking the user and what the user actually supplies. It makes no difference though, but normally it's a conventional practice. So let me go ahead and type my name, Elijah, and then it gets printed to the console. And it returns it as a string or a character. All right, let's write another code where we are now asking the person for his age. So let's go ahead and say prompt equals, and then let's just say, how old are you? And let's have one space. And if we should execute this line of code, now we get the prompt, how old are you? And I'm just going to type 90. Well, I'm not 90 years old. Anyways, so 90, and just simply execute, and we get 90 returned not as a number, but rather a string or a character because of the double quotes that surrounds the number. So any output that is returned from this readline function is just simply a character string. Now let's make this much more intuitive. So for example, I would like to save this into an object, and let's call that object name. So here, I will just do this, and I save this into a name. And if I should execute, now it asks for my prompt, and then I would say, Elijah, press enter to execute. And when we come into the environment window, we see that the object name now holds the text that you gave it, which is Elijah. If we come to the console and we just simply type name and execute, you realize that Elijah is printed to the console. So this read line accepts input from a user, and you can also go ahead and save it into an object for later use. Again, let's go ahead and create another object called age, and let's give this very code to that object. And then we can go ahead and execute and enter the value 90 like we did before, execute, and realize that the age also contains the number 90. But remember, it is a character string because of the quotes around it. Okay, so the name and that of age have been created. And so if I should now use the class function and pass the object name to it, we see that that is simply a character string. Again, if you also do the same thing for age, even though we type the number, when you execute, realize that that is also a character. So for example, if you wanted age to retain its numeric nature or class, then all you have to do is just simply convert this particular character string to a number. And how do we do that? Let's simply call this one age underscore 1. Let's copy this code. And then we would go ahead and paste it here. But if I really want to change this to a number, then all I have to do is pass this to as.numeric, like we did before, type conversion. So all I have to do is say as.numeric, and then within the parentheses, I will just simply paste my code. And that means whatever you supply to this particular prompt will now be converted to a numeric data type and saved into this object called age1. Let's go ahead and execute this. And now let's enter the value, let's say 100, execute. And then when we check age1, let's go ahead and use the class function. And I pass into it age_1 and execute. You realize that this is now a number, and for that matter, it allows you to do further things with it. Like, for example, age_1 plus 100 will simply give you 200 because age1 now contains the value of 100. So you can also use your type conversion skills to convert character strings to whatever object that you are looking for. Now, another function that we also need to look at is the paste and paste0 functions. So we will start with the paste function, but basically these two functions, what they do is to join multiple characters or strings into one character. It's very simple. So here, if we also go ahead and check the documentation for paste function, now we observe that this is used to concatenate strings. Concatenate is another word for combine strings. So we just simply concatenate vectors after converting to character. Now this is going to be very simple very soon. So basically, when we get to look at the usage, we see that the paste function and the paste0 function all takes the very first argument to be this ellipsis, which is going to be one or more R objects, which is to be converted to character vectors. Now, for the paste function, we have another argument, which is the SEP, which is simply to separate the terms that you give to this ellipsis. All right, we will demonstrate that very soon. Now, the paste0 doesn't have this separator, and it's normal because we will explain what this paste0 really means. It means that there is no space or any character between the text that you actually provide in the very first part of the argument. And that is as far as we'll go. The rest of the arguments will not be considering them. So let's go ahead and look at how we can use the paste function. So first things first, let's go ahead and say paste function, and then within it, let's supply a character, so which is hello, and then comma, let's supply my name, Elijah, like this. So we only supply two characters. Now you can give it as many characters as you want because of this ellipsis over here. You can pass as many arguments that you want for the very first part. And when you want to handle the sep argument, I will also demonstrate that very soon. So here, I'm just simply going to execute this and you would see what happens, because we basically said the paste and paste0 functions will join multiple strings into one character. So let's go ahead and execute this, and we see that these two characters, hello and Elijah, separated by the comma, have been put together into hello Elijah as one character or one string. So again, let's write another code. Let's say paste, and then the very first one I would say you are, then comma, then 90, and then again let's say years old. So we have you are as one character, then we have a number. Let's see what happens to this particular number. Then after that we have the years old. So let's go ahead and execute this code. And when we run that, we have you are 90 years old. So even though this is a number, it becomes part of the character string. That is what goes underneath the hood. So you would see that everything that you supply to this paste function will now be returned as part of the character string. So let's go ahead and also write another code. Let's say paste, and then I would have A, comma, and then B, comma, and then C. So guess what is going to happen when we execute this code? Concatenated together to one character, so A, B, C. Now it is time for us to use the second argument, which is the separator argument, SEP. Now the default one is just space. So basically all the codes that we have written for the paste function just simply have this SEP as space. So we have double quote here, and between it we have space. So now if you go ahead and execute this code, you would see that we end up getting the same result. That means we can actually specify our own separator. So what do we do? First of all, if I close this space and execute, you now realize that the ABC simply has no space between them. Again, if I also go ahead and, for example, let's say I put the hyphen between this code for the separator argument, then these characters will be separated by that very hyphen. So that is the functionality of this separator argument. Now, if you don't specify this argument name, I wouldn't know what type of separator you are doing. Because, for example, if I should go ahead and remove this SEP, it will simply consider this hyphen here as part of the entire string concatenated into one character string like this. So you would see ABC, then hyphen. So it is very advisable to always specify the separator argument after you have given your list of character values that is supposed to be merged into one character string. One more code, if I should copy this and just simply replace this with, for example, let's say the /, and if you should execute, realize that now each of these texts is separated by the /. So the second part of this paste function is the paste0. And this paste0, let's put the question mark before it and execute, get the documentation, and we see that the paste0 has no separator. All right. So in that case, okay, it's equivalent to separator. Okay, it's equivalent to paste, but now the separator is just simply nothing in between the quotes like we did over here. So if I should go ahead and, for example, just simply type the A and then B and then C and execute, you now realize that they are put together just like when we specify the separator here to be empty string, just like this. So that is what the paste0 actually does. So it gives you control over where to put your own spacing. So for example, if I do this, then I can say after this A, let's put a space. Then after this B, let's put a space. And maybe that is it. And if we should go ahead and execute, you now realize that we can control our own spacing. All right. So that's exactly what this paste0 function does. So it's the same as the paste, just that now you can go ahead and specify your own spacing if you want. So again, let's do something else. So let's say paste0, and then I am going to go ahead and say user, then underscore. Now, the second thing that I'm going to pass here is going to be a vector. Yes. If I go ahead and say 1, 2, 3, we know that this 1, 2, 3 is a vector. So if I come into the console and I say 1:3, we now have a vector of numbers 1, 2, 3. Now, this means that this particular text here is going to get distributed over each of these numbers and be returned. Let's see how that works out. If I go ahead and execute this, we now see user 1, user 2, user 3. So every single number within this vector will be distributed over by the user character which you gave. So I could go ahead and do something else again and say paste0, and then I would say row. Then let's have a space after the row. Then if I come to the next argument, I'm just simply going to pass a vector of 4, 10, and 200. So what do you think is going to happen? Exactly, we're going to have row 4, row 10, row 200. But remember, we have a space here, which we actually put it because we're using the paste0. And so for that matter, if we should execute, we now have row 4, row 10, row 200. So imagine if we didn't put any space there, like this, I close the space and I execute, then realize that the numbers and the text will be joined together with no spacing. So you could use paste0 if you want to control your own spacing, and use paste function if you want the default separator to be a space, or you simply want to supply your own separator to separate those texts that you give it. Now let's move on to the cat function. So this particular function outputs text and values and simply has no quotes. Yes, you get it. So when we use the paste0 and the paste function, you realize that every single text has a quote around it. But this cat function doesn't have that quote. That is the basic difference. So it makes the text you are printing much more beautiful for what you actually expect. So now let's go ahead and do something with this particular function. But there is one thing that you need to take note of. This cat function, unlike the paste and paste0 functions, you cannot store output from the cat function in object because it doesn't really return an object. Now, let me show you what I mean by this. When we had, for example, the very first code, let's copy this and come to the console and then paste it here. When you execute, you realize that the two characters have been concatenated, put together. Now, I can go ahead and save this into an object. Let's actually call it combine, like this. And if I should go ahead and execute, now you can print this combine, and then you realize that the combined text will be saved into this particular object, hello Elijah. That is exactly what we are talking about. But for the cat function, you cannot save this into an object. Okay, we'll demonstrate it very soon. So there are also other special characters. But first, let's go ahead and do something with it. All right. So let's go ahead and say the name is a character Elijah. That is my name. And the age, let's go ahead and agree that I'm 90 years old, which I'm not. And let's run these two codes. So we now have name as Elijah and age as 90. Now you would use the cat function the same way you use the paste function. So I would go ahead and first of all, let's check the documentation of the cat function. And you can see that this one concatenate and print. So it outputs the objects concatenating or combining the representations. So basically, if I come here, we have the same ellipsis, which means you can give as many characters as you want to be combined. We will just simply jump over this file argument here and move on to the sep argument, which we have seen in the paste function. So we exactly know what this sep function also does. Sorry, the sep argument does. All right, so let's go ahead and now write our first code. So what I'm going to do is just simply to write a statement. So I would say, hello, then, comma, Elijah. But then instead of writing my name, Elijah, I'm just simply going to go ahead and just pass the variable which I've created, which is name. Then I would now say you are, then comma, then I'll pass age again, then comma, and I would say years old, like that. So let's go ahead and run this code. And then you see that we now have a very nice text without those quotes, troubling us with how we look at our text in R. So we have, hello, Elijah, you are 90 years old. So that's exactly what we are talking about. Now, there are some special characters that we can be supplying to these arguments that we pass into the cat function. And those special characters, let me just simply write it here, special characters. We have the very first one being the \n, which simply means insert new line. And then let's come to the next line with more spacing, and so that they will be at par. And I'll say the \t is to insert a tab. So let's see how this actually works. So let me go ahead and copy this same line of code and paste it here. And all I'm going to do right now is after the greetings for my name, which is hello, and the name is Elijah as we have saved here. So hello, Elijah. Then I want this you are, okay, so the beginning of that phrase to actually move to the next line. So if I want to do that, then I can now come to before the Y and just insert this particular special character. So I'm just going to go ahead and say \n. And now let's go ahead and execute. And we realize that it now breaks that text to the new line. So we have hello Elijah on one line, and then you are 90 years old on another line. And that is because of this \n. You could have done it in another way. So for example, you can paste the same code here, and maybe instead of just putting \n before the Y, you can create your own text again. So let's have a comma here, and then I would say \n. So you would observe that we now have hello, then my name, Elijah. Then we have insert a new line, then go ahead and bring me the rest of the sentence. So if I execute, we end up getting the same result. The only difference is that we now have a space. And this particular space here, which we don't have here, is just simply the separator argument that is simply working right there. So the default separator is just simply a space in between every single argument that you pass to the cat function. That is what it does. So if I now go ahead and copy the same code And then this time, if I specify the separator to be, let's say 888, which is not normal, but yes, we get it. So if we go ahead and execute this line of code, now you realize that for every single place where there is supposed to be a space, we just simply have that 888 right here. So we have hello, and then followed by the number 888, then the name Elijah, then followed by the 888, then we have the new line, and then 888 like that. So it follows like this. So you can go ahead and do many things with your code. But just to prove the point, that is exactly what this cat function does. So you realize that the cat function is a much more convenient way to actually print text without the trouble of having these particular quotes between them. So for example, if I should now go ahead and copy this code, paste it here, and then change this cat to paste and execute, you would also realize that we have hello Elijah, you're 90 years old, but this time we have that very quote around it, and then we have what normally we get with our output whenever we are printing something that looks like a vector. We have the square bracket and the 1 right here. So that is the difference between the cat function and the paste function. But we don't have a cat0 function. All right, so that is also something I wanted to draw attention to. All right, so based on what we have done, okay, there is also one more thing that we need to do, which is the tab. So we see exactly what that looks like. So for example, I'm just simply going to go ahead and say the cat function, and let's have hello, and then let's have Elijah. Okay, let me go ahead and write my name. So Elijah like this. And if I should go ahead and execute, we have hello Elijah. Now, if I go ahead and before the E, just write these special characters \T, I'm just simply inserting a tab. And so that means it is equivalent to about 4 spacing. So you realize that there are now many spaces more than necessary. That is what this tab is actually doing. So let's go ahead and copy this code. And if I now go ahead and say \N, we know that hello comes on one line and Elijah goes to the next. And now let's copy the same code. And now let's have the new line, then \T. So we insert a new line, and then we insert a tab, and then we go ahead and execute that. So if we now go ahead and execute this code, we now have the hello, then it breaks to the new line and inserts this huge tab right here. So you can use this \N and \T to control the insertion of a new line or the insertion of a tab. Now at this point, we are now going to make it much more practical. The last thing we do before this lesson comes to an end, we are now going to create our own personalized greeting. So first of all, we are going to combine all that we have done from the very beginning, the readline function with the paste or the cat function. We are going to just simply combine them. So let's go ahead and now say name as an object. And then we have readline. And then for the prompt, we are just simply going to supply and say, what is your name? And then we move to the next line and we create another variable called age with a readline function. And then we will also specify the prompt argument to be how old are you? And because this age is a number, we would want to convert this to a numeric data type. So as dot numeric, like this. And we wrap that around the readline code. And then we are now going to have our first message. Let's call it message_1. And we use the paste function. And then we are just simply going to write a message. So what message should we write? Let's say, nice to meet you. So as a text, comma, and then let's have the name, comma, and then let's have another text with a hyphen and say you are. So let's have this here. So you are, and then let's have the second variable, which is the age right here. And then let's have another text and say years old. Like that. Very nice. So let's have this and let's go ahead and execute. Oops, but we have to execute these ones first. So let's do it one at a time. So let's start from the very first one. Execute. What is your name? Elijah, let me write it well. Elijah, enter. Right, so let's execute this line to age. How old are you? Let's make it 120. Execute. So we have this Elijah saved into name object and then 120 into age object. And now let's go ahead and print a very nice message. So nice to meet you, Elijah. You are 120 years old. That's exactly what we're going to get. So let's execute this and now print message _1. And we have nice to meet you, Elijah. You are 120 years old. Very, very nice. So let me just simply type this message _1. So when you get this script, you will be able to execute after it. Okay. Now let's go ahead and now have message _2. And instead of the paste function, we are just simply going to go ahead and replace this paste with cat. That's all. Very, very simple. And if we should execute, then we can also go ahead, but you realize that we mentioned before that the cat function, you cannot actually save it into an object. That is why even when I created this particular object for it, it goes ahead and prints the text without actually saving this into this object. Now let's execute this message _2 and see if that object is there. And if I should run this, it says now. Yes. So if I go to the environment window, you can see that the message2 is now. And if you remember the documentation, it actually says, let's see if there is something that it says about not being able to save it into an object. Right, so we have the value here being none, which is invisible null. Okay, so that is what we are simply talking about. So the cat function, unlike the paste and paste0 functions, you cannot actually store any output into the cat function because it doesn't really return an object. So I would just simply remove this message2 and would have this. But the paste function allows you to save this into an object and go ahead and print it or do something else with the object which you created. So now that you know how to interact with users, you are ready to write decision-based codes like conditional executions, loops, and create your own custom functions. And that is what we are going to cover in the lessons that follow.